Koka sunarai sunarayanti. 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 Koka sunarai sunarayanti.
Hello, hi. Welcome to this new episode of the Mango TV podcast. Today I'm so excited to have Jules Evans. Jules is a writer, researcher, and practical philosopher exploring the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern well being. He's the author of Philosophy for Life and Other Dangerous Situations, which examines how ancient philosophy influences cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. A former researcher fellow at Queen's Mary University of London, he has studied the history, philosophy, and psychology of well being. His work has been featured in The Times, The Economist, and The Guardian. As director of the challenging Psychedelic Experience Project, he researches psychedelic integration and mental health, bridging philosophy with contemporary therapeutic practices. Thank you for your time, Jules. Thank you for being here.
Nice to be here. Do you prefer Giancarlo or Mango?
Giancarlo.
Is Mango the
Giancarlo.
name of the channel? That's not your nickname as well.
No, no.
Okay, sorry.
Mango is the name of the channel, and actually, it's short for Mangusta.
Mm,
Mangusta is the mongoose, means mongoose in Italian.
uh-huh.
And yeah, the first company we created with some partner, we were investment bankers, and we created a risk management company, and we call it Mangusta because I don't know if you remember in the Jungle Book, in Kipling book, there is the Rikki-tikki-tavi is the mongoose,
Uh-huh.
and the slogan was like "Stay safe, stay together." So she was very loyal, very brave because it was the only animal that kills the cobra,
Mm-hmm.
and very community oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So and also very promiscuous, but we don't say that.
So you went from investment banking to kind of the world of wellness, personal growth,
Yeah,
psychedelics. That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. You know whose fault is that?
A person, I mean Timothy Leary, I don't know, Stanislav Grof,
Yeah, exactly. And the modern version of Leary, maybe a little bit more. I don't know.
Grof,
There was
McKenna, who?
contemporary, like the Rolling Stones magazine. I think it was on the cover. I think, and they call him the modern Castaneda. He's a friend of yours. I mean, I don't know if how friendly you are, but he,
Jorge Ferrer,
no, but we're getting close. We're getting closer.
Daniel Pinchbeck.
Yes.
Ah,
You see, you got
right.
you got there just after three tries. Yeah, Daniel. Basically, I arrived in New York. My wife gave me ayahuasca in Paris in 2005, and so I was fresh with that experience. And I met Daniel, and he had just published "Breaking the Head Open." Do you remember a month?
I read it, yeah.
Yeah, and then he persuaded me to adapt his book 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, into a documentary. And so we did with this filmmaker from Brazil, Joao Amorim. It's called 2012 Time for Change, and it's a documentary about his ideas really. And the main idea is that's a good introduction to why we're here. The main idea was that global transformation comes from personal transformation,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
and I really resonate with that. The old metaphor of, if you want to help in the plane in emergency, you put your oxygen mask first.
Hmm.
Otherwise, without your oxygen, you can't do much.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I feel especially today, and then I'm gonna stop. I feel especially today that a lot of people wants to help without the oxygen mask.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So that's why we try to keep this conversation very much personal based.
Hmm.
And so we're gonna do, even if I hope we're gonna talk about, esoteric topic, but we're gonna keep it biographical and chronological.
Sure. Well, I'm fine. I'd love to, learn about you as well, Giancarlo, and hear about your story. So if you don't mind, like a kind of, I know you want me to tell my story. I like doing that, but I'd love to hear yours too because it sounds fascinating.
Okay, but so we have to go a bit longer than an hour.
Well, we can speak quick. I'm drinking a lot of coffee here, so
Okay, okay. Okay, so tell me about you first. So I want to know everything, like from the very beginning. Where were you conceived, even?
I don't know. I grew up in London, kind of upper middle class family. I went to boarding school, so when I was 13, went to this private school in England called Eton College,
Oh
where
wow!
like Prince William went, where Aldous Huxley went, George Orwell, 500
We
year
just keep the old puberty, pre-teens. I mean, like tell me a little bit. How were you when you were 10 and 12? What were you interested in?
I was a little show off, kind of clown, loved to make people laugh, uh, very energetic, kind of sporty little kid, but sporty, and just loved making people laugh. Really,
Lots of siblings, little siblings.
no, just one brother, one
One
older
brother,
brother,
older brother.
and so we were kind of yeah, we were like London kids and more sporty than intellectual. Yeah, and a kind of performer, really. I like performing. If I, in an alternative universe, I didn't become an intellectual or anything to do with books. I was like a clown or, something like that, some kind of performer. I think I would have been in an alternative universe.
Oh wow! But
Uh,
what was happening at the dinner table with your family? What they're talking about?
I mean, my parents, they're smart. I mean, they went to Cambridge, but they weren't really intellectual. My dad is a businessman, worked in the city of London in the same company his whole life.
Oh wow!
And so he's a kind of city person. My mum was very smart, went to Cambridge when she was 17, but she kind of left her career to bring us up. Um, so they're kind of, I would say center right, upper middle class, not really rich. We lived in an apartment in London where they still live. So, you know, they moved to an apartment in Kensington in about 1983 and they're still there. My father worked in the same company his whole life. So my brother and I, and particularly me, are much more, you know, freewheeling. Like I live in Costa Rica now. I've lived in Russia. I'm more, I've pretty much worked for myself my whole life. So I'm this unstable element. But
Yeah,
my father is a very kind of stable person.
yeah. As a reaction, right?
I
Maybe.
don't know. Yeah, who
Mhm.
knows? I'm not sure. So I went to my brother and I went to Eton College, and that's just this crazy, crazy environment. It's one of the most intense, vivid phases of my life, and I think that's the same for everyone who goes there. This is it's almost a small town. It's certainly a village, and it's all just a school, 1,500 pupils or so, all wearing tailcoats and waistcoats and bow ties. Just bizarre. It's 500 years old. An amazing place. I mean, some people hate it, but if you have nice people around you, if you have bullies around you, then it's hell. It's like concentration camp. If you have nice people around you and you don't mind it, it's you're very lucky. So the opportunities for learning were insane. Like there's like 4 or 5 libraries there in this school. Like, and the amount of writers who went there, from Shelley to Huxley to Orwell to Ian Fleming, all the way up to the present day. The amount of actors, it had 2 theaters. So, like Eddie Redmayne went there, lots of others. I mean, Tom Hiddleston, I can't think of them all, but, lots of politicians went there. So you're given this idea, whatever you want to do, you can do it. Not only you can do it, you probably should do it. You should be exceptional. So you think about, the last. I mean, Boris Johnson went there. David Cameron went there. Kwasi Kwarteng, who was the last terrible Chancellor of the Exchequer, went there. The Archbishop of Canterbury went there. It's just insane. Anyway,
And it wasn't too
Yeah, it
classist.
was very classist. It was very classist, Giancarlo.
But so how did if you were not like eighth of blue blood, of if you're not aristocrat, how did you feel? Did you feel discrimination?
No, not really. But I mean, there were very few ethnic minorities when I was there. There was no women, so it was patriarchal and misogynist, and people just a bit afraid of girls. They're kind of desperate to meet them, but afraid of them. And it was there was kind of nasty classism. There was a kind of suspicion and mutual loathing with the local town, right? Because you get into fights and stuff. There's a song about this by the band The Jam. Do you know the
Yeah,
70s
yeah,
band
yeah,
The Jam?
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
do?
yeah, yeah.
They did a song called Eton Rifles about the kind of a fight between the locals and the school. So class hostility and class fear and loathing, not very nice. That aspect of it really not nice. But I mean, on the whole, no. I mean, I didn't feel that. I had friends and they had big country houses. You know what it's like? It's like that in psychedelia, right? You meet some people who are loaded, but but no, I mean, I think later on when women start coming into the equation, you realize that money and big houses is important because
Interesting,
because
interesting.
it
But
gives
but
you
as
access
yeah,
to more beautiful women.
so that's
But
interesting.
but when you're a teenager, you go to stay with a friend. You're like, wow, big house, but that
That's
doesn't
about it.
necessarily mean they're better than you
Yeah,
because they might be less popular than you or less cool or whatever.
yeah.
But yeah, it was funny. It was funny. So I really enjoyed it. Um, but boarding school it can be quite druggy. And when I was there, which was like 90 to 95, just after the acid house boom. So you got MDMA coming to Ibiza, where you live, and then coming to the UK, you got acid house parties. Suddenly, MDMA is very available, and you have this kind of golden age of dance music. And this affects this freaky little Victorian school in near Windsor, and people we'd start to go night raving, smoke a lot of dope, take MDMA, take LSD, take magic mushrooms. And this became kind of an epidemic when I was at school. Um, so by my last 2 years, people were taking drugs all the time, including me. I would take, like I'm just focusing on this part of the story. This isn't my whole story, but just because we have psychedelics in common. I mean, I was doing LSD sometimes in classes. I was doing it at night. Or we go to London to go clubbing at the weekend. So it got a little out of control. We're talking like 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds having full-on experiences, which we are not set up to comprehend. And it was a very emotionally repressed. This is not an emotionally mature place. We are emotionally repressed, posh English boys. So when people started to have difficult experiences, we are not set up to cope with it. Uh,
What about a home? Were your parents believer, religious? There was any spirituality? Were you initiated to other state of?
my father is Church of England and still is. My school was Church of England, so we went to church every day.
But that didn't help. Didn't help to integrate. No.
Um, Certainly not. No, there was no kind of mystical map, no sense of mystical experiences. But what we did was I was reading Aldous Huxley and I was reading Buddhism or Taoism, so discovering this stuff alongside psychedelics.
Okay, so
But
you had a little bit of a map,
a little bit,
a little
a
bit.
little bit. But I mean, yeah, like the romantic poets and stuff. Yeah. So we had a bit, but not for any of the dark stuff, really. I was
Mm.
reading like the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test was my favorite book when I was 16, and Hunter S. Thompson and that comic book called The Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. So it was this like fun, hedonistic, hippie psychedelic culture. Hey, let's do loads of drugs. It's really fun. It's kind of funny. It's a bit messy, but nothing really bad will happen because we're 16. Nothing, nothing bad ever happens. But it did, to some of us, bad stuff did happen. Like, people had psychotic episodes. People died of overdoses with heroin. People went to prison for dealing. And I had a bad trip when I was in my last year at school, which I did not have the emotional bandwidth to deal with. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I was also smoking dope every day and basically getting kind of strung out. So I then left. I got into Oxford to study English literature. I left when I was, so the year after I left school, I was carrying on doing lots of drugs, going clubbing.
Do you mind to just elaborate a little bit on this bad trip? Which compound was it?
It was a micro dot of LSD. That's what I think. But when you're 17, you don't know exactly.
Yeah.
Do you remember those kind of things?
Yeah, yeah,
Micro
yeah.
dot?
And probably whoever gave it to you didn't even know how much. It could have
No.
been 50 microgram.
Or if it was even LSD. I mean, it was one of these microdots which would give you, a stomach ache as well. So God knows what it was cut with.
And
And
so you went in a dark place, you felt like dying.
it wasn't as strong as that, but I felt blocked. I felt inhibited, self-conscious, outside of myself, like unable to communicate.
Hmm.
And that was very unnatural for me. I was a very natural communicator. And so this was like a self negation, but it wasn't a very strong trip. So that I wasn't, in an ego loss or anything like that. But it was at this level where I just felt stuck and blocked.
Yeah. But you remember as a difficult one.
No, then there was a worse one a year later. I went clubbing, took, I think, uh, LSD and maybe MDMA, went back to an after party. And there I felt very self conscious again, very socially inhibited. Um, and I got everything out of proportion and thought that I was committing some terrible social faux pas by not speaking. And this was unforgivable, in a way that people can only really do on psychedelics, completely out of proportion. And I tried to sleep that night, and I remember thinking very clearly, you've done it now. Like, you've broken yourself. Like, you've broken something. And that belief became a kind of bit of a fixed belief that you've damaged yourself. You're not the same as you were. Um, that, by the way, I now know is quite common for people who have extended difficulties after psychedelics, which is what I now study. This belief, I've broken myself in some way, like I've done something, like something changed on that night, and I've entered a kind of dark timeline. I'm diminished. I'm damaged. What do I do to get better? And people, I mean, I interview people all the time now with this unfortunate kind of a situation, and they're really frightened, and they're like, "Oh God, is that it? Have I broken myself permanently?" And so this fear that exists on the psychedelic experience, oh, I've done something, I've permanently damaged myself. That kind of catastrophizing carries on beyond the trip and can carry on for months or years.
Yeah. But so just to finish a little bit with the biography. So you went to Oxford and then you left after 1 year. You took literature? No.
Yeah, I did literature, English literature. I stayed. My mental health got worse through it. I tried to see a therapist in my second year.
But can you elaborate in which way it was going worse, your mental health?
I was developing this. My symptoms were panic attacks, nightmares, um, feeling like not myself, not losing social confidence, increasing social anxiety, often feeling like two different people, either very confident and extrovert, or kind of inhibited and stuck in my head, ruminating. and just this feeling, constantly trying to figure out what's wrong with me. Why aren't I like I was when I was 16, or like I was for the first 16 years of my life? Like, this isn't me.
But do you think that was linked to your psychedelic usage?
Yeah.
But did you create an explanation about what on the mechanism that create this?
I tried. I thought about it way too much. I really ruminated, and I was an intellectual, so I was reading existentialism or Nietzsche or Shakespeare, all, just trying to figure it out. But I had some idea. I was terrified it was neuro physiological, so that, and out of my control.
Yeah.
I was very, the idea of taking antidepressants was anathema to me. I don't know why, but I don't have a problem with it now. I don't take them now, but anyway,
Do you want to hear my theory?
yeah. But I should say, I think it was probably some genetic stuff as well. It wasn't just random. I later on, a close family member developed bipolar disorder,
Hmm.
but they didn't have it at the time. So there may have been a genetic vulnerability, which then got triggered by adversity. And
Hmm.
in my case, the adversity was difficult psychedelic experiences.
My interpretation, which is just a story, right? It's just like a metaphor that makes sense to me.
Mm.
Is that it starts with the Gabor Mate idea of authenticity versus attachment, right? So Gabor says that in your development years, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, what you might perceive as a loss of attachment, because just because your parents are distracted, it doesn't mean that they don't love you. They're just like they have bigger, like what they think is bigger fish to fry. So at that moment, you feel like you're losing this attachment, and so you want to get the attachment back, and you lose your authenticity because you start behaving age 6, 7, 8, 9. I did that with my father so clearly. You try to make yourself in someone that they would like, so you get their attachment back. I think in that moment, that loss of authenticity create like a friction, like a tear,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then you go through life and you keep on reinforcing this fake
Hmm.
version of yourself, right?
Hmm.
And then sometimes you get comfortable with it, and maybe you feel there's something wrong, but you maybe you're even good at it.
Hmm.
And then when the psychedelic comes, it's like a rapture. It's like
Uh-huh.
it takes brutally. There is a huge gap between this identity you have created and the nothingness that the psychedelic, that the immensity of possibility that the psychedelic brings
Right.
by reducing the default mode network, right?
Yes, I think that makes sense. In my case, I certainly had a personality that loved entertaining and showing off. It was a very social personality, very much aware of other people and of other people's judgments, and that enjoyed making an impression on other people. That was kind of my identity.
That was the authentic. It's tricky all these terms, but you feel that was your authentic self, or it was a constructed self to please?
Um, we have different sides to us, but that was the side of me that I liked most.
Yeah, that you felt comfortable. Yeah.
So it's not exactly authentic, but you can get stuck in a role where. So what happened, I think, in the psychedelics, I mean, is, well, one way of thinking of it, it was a negation of that. So suddenly, I can't show off, I can't be natural, funny, the kind of clown.
Yeah.
All of them.
Who am I? Right.
Yeah, who am I? Oh, it's like I have to be, I must be. Like, so there's this pressure to be funny. Um, but so that's one way of thinking of it. But there's multiple. You could also, there could be just a genetic aspect as well. There was some latent genetic tendencies to um, pathology that got triggered, and so to me, I'm like, who the hell is this? And then I had to accept, and it took years. This other side of me, which was introverted, which was more neurotic, all of that, and I didn't like that at all. That new me. I wanted to be the extrovert me. I thought he could. Well, he could do so much better in life. He could get more power, success, women, money.
But let me ask you something. The extroverted you were in the enriching, nourishing, fulfilling romantic relationship?
Uh, you mean the younger
The,
me?
the extroverted, the
No, because
old you.
no, because he was only he missed all that. He was a boy. He was a boarding.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So that's why I think, you're saying I missed my old me, but then maybe there's things of the new me that is much more nourishing.
Are you sure? But it takes a long, long time to accept that
Yeah.
because
How long? 2 years?
no, 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 no. I mean, like
5 years?
a
10
decade.
years?
It took a
Decade.
decade. Yeah, I didn't start really accepting myself. I mean, I was getting better in my 20s, but I didn't really have a relationship until I was 30.
Yeah, me too. I mean, your life story is very similar to mine, and to many people that have gone through a psychedelic transformation. But
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, so there you go. And then finished university. I was fine intellectually, but socially getting worse and worse. Had a kind of mini breakdown when I left because I'm like, what the fuck do I do now? I couldn't do a job interview without having a panic attack.
when you graduate from Oxford,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wanted to be a novelist. That was my A plan. I had no B plan. Tried to write a novel. Turns out I couldn't do it. And I was like, what do I do? and ended up going, I was, I worked as a financial journalist, and that was very different to my idea of myself.
I read one of your blog, one your newsletter, when you say, let's
Yeah.
say, I end up talking about the mortgage market. That's
Yeah,
what happens when you do too much drugs.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I was writing about the mortgage bond market.
That was so funny. I laughed a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, fan brief. And having to put on a suit and go on the tube to Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch. And I'm not making the money that they're making. I'm the little schlepping journalist who's making, you're making 18,000 the first year,
Yeah.
and writing about something I didn't care about at all, completely different to my idea of myself, which is this great writer. But and I have really bad social anxiety, so I didn't fit into that environment, and I was unpopular in it, and that was horrible for me. I'd never been unpopular before, and then
Were
I
you
was,
were you were you regretting all the psychedelics at that point?
of course,
Ah, you really? You say, I wish could go back and keep the extroverted me. What the fuck I was thinking?
of course, my
Oh
life
my.
was, well, it was obviously worse.
Oh wow. And how long the regret lasted, you think?
I mean, look, my life has always been harder ever since.
But even now?
No, because over the years you stop regretting and you accept your life. But like, and I think I'd have probably been a very arrogant asshole, if something bad didn't happen to me. If nothing bad ever happened to me, I'd be a bit of an arrogant asshole probably. And that's life. Like I realize that now. You become philosophical. Like
Yeah.
you accept that bad things happen.
Yeah, but not just an arrogant asshole, probably alone.
Well, I mean, I don't think so. No.
You would have a lot of
When
friends,
I
but
was an extrovert, I had way more friends.
no, but not meaningful. I mean, I know I've been very judgy, but you are on a now. You're married now.
Mhm, yeah, but only like 2 weeks ago.
No, really? You just got married?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
46 or 47. So that's very late in life to get married.
How long were you guys together?
We've been together 3 years.
Yeah. Okay, so you were regretting. It's like, what am I doing with my life? And so
Yeah.
where are we now? You,
I have to let it go because I had intense regret for like 4 years. And I couldn't accept who I was and how my life was.
but specifically, you were specifically regretting to haven't taken those psychedelics.
Mm, that was the traumatic event
Yeah,
that I was fixated on.
yeah,
So it was not so much, it's just like I wasn't anti-drugs or anything like that. It was just like that was the bad thing that happened to me,
I
and now
see.
my life is worse. And it's the same. it's the same for people who come to my NGO now. They're like, "Oh, my life changed on January the 4th,
Yeah.
2022. That was the day I went and did MDMA or whatever. That was the day I went to Peru."
Yeah.
So anyway, and I had to just let that go. I mean, at a certain point, I was like, "Okay, are you just gonna die then? Are you not gonna accept your life, or are you gonna accept this? But this happened to me, and now I'm still alive, and I'm gonna live my life."
Yeah.
I had that choice, but it gets a bit more weird because I got worse and worse and worse until about 2020. Sorry, 2002, something like that. So I left in 99 university, trying to, doing this job, real bad social anxiety. And then I had a near death experience skiing. I
Wow.
had a skiing accident and had a kind of white light encounter.
Wow.
And in this minute or so, when I was lying at the bottom of this mountain with, broken leg, and I guess I was unconscious. I was immersed in this white light, and had this very strong sense that what was causing my suffering was my beliefs, and that I could let go of my beliefs, like the belief that you're broken.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, look, you have a soul, and your soul can't be broken, and you are loved. So there's this deep feeling of being loved, and loved, and there's something in us that's unbreakable, like
Beautiful. Beautiful.
yeah, like the soul, and that
Yeah.
we all have it, and we're all connected to it.
Yeah.
So I wake up from this experience on the mountain, and I'm like, oh, I've been in a skiing accident. Am I paralyzed? And I try to move my toes, and I can move them. So I was like, no, I'm not paralyzed. Oh, I've had this incredible experience. And my uncle comes up, skis up to me and says, "Oh my God," because I guess I have my bones sticking through my legs. And I try to tell him everything's okay, everything's beautiful, But anyway, and I felt so in love with humanity for about 2 months. I was like, oh, I'm being freed. Like winter is over.
How long? Which year are we now, más o menos?
2002. I can't
Okay.
remember exactly.
Yeah.
I think,
Okay.
yeah,
More. Yeah.
2002.
Yeah.
Uh, could have been even 2001, but I think it was 2002. I think it was after 9/11. Um, and yeah, I felt, it was a rebirth. But then the habits came back, the habits of anxiety and depression.
After two
And
months.
yeah, about that
Yeah.
slowly, not.
Yeah.
But I realized I needed to strengthen, this insight that what's causing my suffering is beliefs. I needed a path, a practice to weaken the old beliefs and strengthen the new beliefs. And
Yeah.
so I turned to like cognitive therapy, and I turned to Stoicism. Um, and cognitive therapy came from Stoic philosophy, and they're both based on this idea that what causes suffering is your beliefs, and you can change your beliefs, and that we have this God within us that can choose this belief or that belief, and that gives us this power to adapt. Along with other things like we're connected to the great divine, and this
Yeah.
mystical philosophy, really. And so that helped me, but still took years because I
Yeah.
was so kind of broken, really, that I then went to live in Russia. I was a
I mean,
freelance.
that was your story, right? That you were broken. That was your story.
That was my belief. Yeah,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course. What I was lucky enough to connect in my mind to something bigger than that, the
Yeah.
soul.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Uh,
Beautiful cathartic moment. Yeah.
yeah, really lucky,
Yeah.
and very mysterious. What the fuck?
Yeah.
What the hell
Yeah.
is that?
But it's like a psychedelic experience. Same thing, no?
Well, yeah, but I suppose it could be. Yeah, I mean, people have those kinds of experiences. Like, oh my,
Yeah.
being freed when they're stuck in loops
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
caves
Yeah.
of negative beliefs or
Yeah.
negative
Yeah.
habits.
Yeah, yeah. Anton Bilton. I know you wrote about him. He's making we are making a documentary, and he sponsored a clinical trial on this idea that NDEs, and even alien abduction. They're all DMT release, endogenous DMT release.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay, but
What
so I
do
don't
you mean?
want to,
They're all accompanied by that. Yeah.
or accompanied by that, or a combination. But
It's just, yeah. But I mean, like, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Like, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, why would, like, what, you fall at a certain angle and it releases, DMT? I don't know. It's just mysterious. I mean, you can look for things that might accompany it. So maybe that experience was accompanied by some DMT release in the pineal gland, but it's still mysterious to me.
yeah, totally mysterious. But I mean, the speculation is that when you die, there is this release of DMT, right?
Yeah,
So when your neurobiology is close to shutting down, but not yet,
yeah,
you have this white light, and you see your past life, and you're like in between this liminal state, right?
I get it. And it's interesting to me. But this is a spiritual reality which is so powerful. It doesn't need, I mean, I don't think God is there going, okay, release the DMT. Like
No,
God
no.
can do whatever God could do whatever it wants.
Yeah, it's a neurobiological function.
Yeah, I mean there might be correlates with it, but I guess what
Yeah.
I'm saying is like, when people look for these material correlates, like
No, but
left
some
brain,
people needs the cognitive understanding. I don't
yeah,
care. I don't
yeah, yeah,
care.
yeah, yeah. Like that could be part of it. But
Yeah.
God can do what the hell
Of course, of course, of course.
he wants,
Of course, of course.
Um,
But so in our Western mind, we need the causation, we need to understand, and it helps people to wake up, you know.
yeah, yeah,
That's why I've been supporting. Anton has been,
yeah.
like injecting people with this like, an hour of DMT. I went under. I did the test, and he wanted to prove, and for me, I don't need all that. I don't think, but some people do.
There are similarities between psychedelics, near-death experiences, and alien
Alien,
abduction.
yes,
And
of
one of
course,
the similarities is it's not always pleasant.
can be,
Like
yeah.
so, first of all, sometimes people have hell experiences, and that's true with near-death experiences too. Poor bastards. They. For me, that affected my whole life because it made me think, oh, when I die, I might go back there. And so, like, this is all just like that makes me relaxed.
Yeah,
Like I'm like, oh, life is better there. So
yeah,
when life
yeah,
is hard here, don't worry. In a while you're going to go back to like the pure lands.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
but if you have a hell experience, you're like, oh my
yeah,
god, and then there's that afterwards.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's the same with psychedelics and with same with UFO experiences. But the other thing is ontological shock. Which is a phrase from UFO research. But I mean, it's also like, well, now what? What do I do now? So I wrote a book. Um, I wrote. I came back. I must write. I must communicate. And I wrote a first book, and it was very ambitious. Nothing came of that. And then finally, when I was about 35, so much later, over 10 years later, I wrote a book about Stoic philosophy, and that was my first book, and it did great. Um, anyway, I guess what I was just saying is when people have these kinds of experiences, they can sometimes think, why am I still here? What am I meant to do? Um, yeah,
I mean, it's a soul journey, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Once you get into this idea that you don't have to understand it.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, exactly.
for me, the idea of the soul journey has been the most useful framework to understand this mysterious life of ours.
A veil of soul making. That's what
Exactly,
Keats called it.
exactly. But so just to finish, so what makes you go to Russia?
Various reasons. My brother at that point was exceptionally successful. He was at 24 advisor to a minister, and I think he was so successful. I thought I need to get out from under his shadow
I see.
and to go abroad. And it was also like I don't know. Um, I thought it'd be exciting and just freedom and go somewhere where no one knows me
Yeah,
and
anonymity.
get out from London and how it was kind of. I remember like going to sleep in my apartment in Moscow, downtown Moscow, and I had a map of the world above my bed, and Russia went from the middle of the map to the end of the map, and just thinking, here I am in this huge country where no one knows me. It's great, like complete, anonymity, and that was liberating, and it let me start my life again as a nobody. You know what I mean? Because I had to let go. I have
Yeah.
this big idea of myself,
Yeah.
which like Eton and Oxford had given me, and all
Yeah.
these expectations. And there in Moscow in 2004, I'm a complete nobody. Nobody expects anything of me, and that was nice.
That's another rebirth. And so, but what did you? So and then what did you do in Moscow?
Then I was a business journalist there,
Uh
writing
huh.
about the kind of early years of Putin, this big economic boom there, lots of money being made, and I'm not a great journalist there because I don't speak Russian,
Yeah.
so I'm a real C level, Division 3 foreign correspondent. But I also and I'm reading about philosophy, and I'm reading about ideas, and gradually I start to write about them. And when I come back to England when I'm 30, I start to write about philosophy, mental health, spirituality, and that's really like the beginning. What was inside me becomes actualized and public, and I start a blog. So I've been writing online since 2008 for myself, or even 2007. I start to interview famous psychologists and therapists, like the founder of cognitive therapy, Albert Ellis. I did the last ever interview with him before he died. I interview people like Martin Seligman, Aaron Beck, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. So all these, I start to really write about psychology and mental health, but also philosophy, and I become part of this Stoic revival. So people are beginning to get into more and more into Stoic philosophy. They're beginning to discover each other online. In 2010, I come back from Costa Rica. I come back from Russia in 2007. In 2009 or 2000, yeah, I think 2009, I organize a gathering of modern Stoics in in California, the first ever gathering of Stoics for 2,000 years. I write a Stoic newsletter. I interview modern Stoics, people in the police force or in the military or in banking, all these kinds of different walks of life. Um, and I'm part of this kind of Stoic revival. I start to connect with psychologists, with philosophers, and we're part of this Stoic revival, which has grown and grown since then.
And when did you find psychedelic again?
After that book, my second book was called The Art of Losing Control, and it's about ecstatic experiences, the
Interesting.
Dionysiac. So at
Yeah.
the end of Philosophy for Life, I say this is all very rational, but there was another side to ancient Greek culture, like Dionysus and the Eleusinian mysteries.
Yeah.
And in my next book, I'm going to return to that topic because I knew that people sometimes find healing and flourishing not through reason, but through ecstasy.
Exactly.
So when I was researching that book, The Art of Losing Control, I went to Breaking Convention in 2015. I'm like, wow, there's this psychedelic renaissance. There's all this research happening.
And you met Dimitrescu.
Eh?
There was this writer. I think is something like Dimitrescu. I mean, he wrote about the Eleusinian mystery and the use of ergot fungus and
Yeah.
psychedelic in ancient Greece.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, so I was reading like, yeah, that kind of stuff. And I was just interested in ancient Greek culture and its balance of the Socratic and the Dionysiac.
Yeah.
Like the
The
philosophers,
reason. Yeah.
yeah, they go and get initiated at these
Yeah.
places, and
Yeah.
that was so interesting to me, that balance. And I think I've stayed interested in that topic. And when I'm in very rationalistic culture, I'm like, where's the ecstasy? And
Yeah.
when I'm in new age culture, I'm like, where's the
Reason.
rationality?
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Sorry, I missed that. What brought you to Breaking Convention
well, I don't know, I just went along in 2015, and
while you were writing about
the art of
ecstatic
losing
states?
control, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I met like Robin Carhart Harris there
Yeah.
and people like
Yeah.
David Luke.
Yeah.
and saw Roland Griffiths
Yeah.
lecturing, and I was like, this is a fascinating scene. You've got chemists, and you've
Fascinating.
got witches, and you've got
Yeah.
shamans.
Yeah.
What a crazy mashup.
Yeah. Yeah. And anthropologist and
Yeah,
theologian and historic and neurobiology and anthropologist, like everything.
and musicians.
And
Yeah.
musician. Yeah.
um but I was
That was
interested.
2015.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
was interested in ecstatic experiences, so not just psychedelics. I was also interested in ecstatic Christianity. I became a Christian for
Yeah.
all of 18 months and was part of an ecstatic church for a Brit, but then I was like, well, I could have an ecstatic experience, but then my reason would be like, I can't accept A, B, and C. And then I'm kind of part of New Age culture, but I have a love-hate relationship with New Age culture. It's my culture. I love places like Esalen and Aldous Huxley and Stanislav Grof. This kind of slightly intellectual
Yeah.
wing of New Age
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
transpersonal psychology.
Yeah.
But I'm also have a very critical tendency in me. So I'm also like, what's going on here? And look at all this bullshit and look at all these grifters.
Yeah.
And even in the
But not the Stan Grof. I mean, what would you criticize of the Stan Grof body of work?
well, recently I spent years researching Aldous Huxley, and I have issues with him, with Stan Grof. Well, that it's a mashup of occultism and mysticism and science. Is he a scientist? If he presents himself as a scientist, but you know where's the evidence for a lot of his theories? Where's the evidence for his perinatal theory of trauma? Where's the evidence for his archetypal astrology?
Yeah, but
So
I'm smiling because Rupert Sheldrake says that like the secular materialistic, the base of our paradigm, everything is based on evidence except the beginning of everything, right? So they say the Big Bang. They say, okay, we can't explain that, so give us a miracle for free, and then we can explain everything else.
yeah, sure, I know, but I agree. Like, I'm not saying, but if you're presenting yourself as a scientist, then and you're presenting theories of explanation for why people are unwell and how to get better, it's ethical to say, what if I'm wrong? To measure outcomes. So Groff is a huge influence on the psychedelic underground and the overground and new age culture and breath work. But all of and so there's countless above ground and underground healers who follow Groff's work. Including me. I co-edited a book about spiritual emergencies, directly inspired by Groff. But when we think we're healing people with altered states of consciousness, very powerful experiences, we need to make sure we're not causing harm unintentionally. And so, how do we do that? Well, at the simplest, you can ask people, how do you feel now? You feel better or worse? How about 6 months later? So, trying to measure outcomes and like asking ourselves, what if I'm wrong? Is this really useful? Because an idea might not even be harmful. It might just be unnecessary. So, do you need two therapists, or all these kinds of things? Like, and I think if you do, there's just a good there's an ethics to that, which is there's a limit to evidence, and there's also different forms of evidence as well. Like, you can just saying to someone, well, how do you feel now? That's kind of a form of evidence. It's just a form of feedback.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I hear
anyways,
you. I hear
yeah,
you. But yeah, I
yeah,
mean, the one thing I would say is that, Stan Grof and all the person you mentioned, they're developing a new paradigm, which is, this idea of like, exploring the subconscious, right? Like
yeah,
in modern science, the subconscious is not part of the equation.
yeah,
And so, and so the subconscious now, like also thanks to people like you, the new science of the subconscious is now being developed as we speak.
yeah,
So of course, Stangrove was the first one, and I feel now there is more and more. As there is more evidence, as there's more tests, as there's more clinical trial, people
Yeah.
are more aware about the re-traumatization.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I'm sure we're gonna talk about it, but there is a lot of charlatans and people that
Yeah.
are creating so much problem. But like any industry at the beginning is a mess.
Yes. I agree. I mean, the art of losing control was basically saying, look, people have ecstatic experiences. These are normal and natural. They're not always good for you, but often they are. And we should find a place for them in Western culture.
Correct.
So I was very much from that tradition of transpersonal psychology. And, saw these people as heroes because they're trying to broaden the Overton window for Western culture and say, look, let's find spaces and rituals for this normal human experience. And these shouldn't be taboo. Then, and so I was very much aligned with that mission. But now and then it's happening. So now people are more and more having ecstatic experiences. Um, but like you say, it's messy and it's bumpy, and sometimes it's damaging, and it also creates it creates space for kind of charlatans, like you
Yeah.
say, or just people that are overconfident and they're just like, oh, I've taken ayahuasca a few times, I know what I'm doing, or
Yeah.
I'm channeling light language. um, so uh, Ecstatic experiences are so unruly, you know.
Yeah.
They're unruly for individuals and they're unruly for societies. I'm just researching this morning for my newsletter, ecstatic Christianity and how it's shaping American politics, and the idea of divine inspiration, but also the idea of demons, and the idea that your political opponents are demonic.
Mm.
And this is the dark side of re-enchantment. And there's something similar sometimes in New Age culture. You can see more and more an interest in the demonic and entities, and that's not always healthy. So, how do we balance the rational and the ecstatic? And that's just a really interesting, hard question.
Yeah, yeah. But so have you ever explored any of the somatic psychotherapies, from Peter Levine, Van der Kolk, Gabor Mate? Did you research a little bit that type of psychotherapy?
Um, yeah, a little bit, but not
Because f-
not 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 a whole lot. Not
because
a
for
whole lot.
me that's the key to maximize the outcome of the psychedelic experience. I feel that, I think I can't remember who was the first now. One of the first author is going to come to mind. He basically proposed that, people when people hear about trauma, they think about being to war, being raped, being
Yeah.
kidnapped, being beaten up, right? And
Hmm.
so a lot of people, when you hear trauma, it's like, that's not me.
Hmm.
They immediately disconnect.
Hmm.
But then there is another type of trauma that they call development trauma, which
Hmm.
doesn't have to be violent, doesn't have it's not that something bad happened to you, but it's something good did not happen to you. So
Mm.
you went to the school recital and there is the two names of your two parents, it's the two empty seats. So,
Mm.
and then people with real trauma would say, whatever, your food was on the table, you were warm, you went on holiday, you went skiing,
Mm.
shut up. But
Mm.
but it's not true, because development trauma can be as pernicious as the big trauma, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So the development trauma, I can't remember, it was the first author, but it's going to come to mind. He says, okay, development trauma is not just a memory in your brain; it's a neurobiological tear.
You
It's
mean
a
you're talking about like Winnicott?
no Winnicott. Van der Kost, the body keep the score, reviewed that. Is
Mm.
this idea that development trauma is like a little tear on your autonomic nervous system.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
can almost visualize it as a little tear, right?
Mhm.
So he says that, like, that's why they this lineage of somatic psychotherapies, they say, listen, talk therapy is not very effective because you can talk for years, like Woody Allen style. You can talk for 30 years, but the therapist doesn't cannot access the subconscious material because it's
Mm.
subconscious, right?
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but if you listen to your body, you can actually identify when you activate the development trauma. You can activate where in your body you feel this concentration, this pain, and sometimes it's in your neck, in your throat, in your stomach. And Gabor practice is called compassionate inquiry. There's
Uh-huh.
all kind of different somatic work, but basically they scan your body, you activate this development trauma, and then you make friends with this pain and you integrate in the body.
Yeah.
Is this idea that when you get activated, when you get triggered in everyday life by anything, from work, from society, from expectations that are not met, all you get this trigger. Sometimes is a fair response towards an injustice or boundary breaking, but most of the time is a reaction, is not a response. So the reaction is caused by this activation on your nervous system that can be healed.
Hmm. Yeah.
So what I propose is that the psychedelic experience, the ecstatic states or the expanded states, they give you a glimpse of a whole nervous system. It's like a lighthouse. The psychedelic doesn't bring you the heel. It shows you where it is. It's like the lighthouse. Ah, it's over there. But then you still have to swim there. And so like Alan Watts says, the psychedelic is the boat that takes you on the other side of the river, but then the journey continues on foot. You're not arrived on the other side. You still have to go to the lighthouse. And so for me, the journey, the therapy is this somatic therapy of integrating this pain in the body. And sometimes you get closer and you might revisit the psychedelic experience. And so you have a new glimpse of the lighthouse. Like, oh, good, it's closer, but it's not right. It's more left. It's like a compass, you know.
Hmm.
And then I love to pick your brain on this. On the integration of the psychedelic in the West. You're familiar with Icy Ears, right? With Geronimo and
Yeah, Geronimo, he lives in Ibiza, does he?
yeah, and Ben Delone. And so I had them both on the podcast, and they explain very clearly. They both spend a lot of time with indigenous in different parts of the Amazon, and they say, listen, in the West, with the medicalization and everything, as we do as Westerner, we have like the silver bullet shortcut, and we think that this is a product that we take. A psychedelic is not a product; it's an ontology, it's a belief system, it's a process. And so, as we need to teach the West to integrate this molecule, not just as molecule, but as they come with an ontology. And so, I just wanted to hear your take on that. You are clearly, like most of the people, frustrated with the state of affair with psychedelic today because it is messy and there's a lot of pain and casualties even, and as you know, people are going crazy, psychotic episode. So how can we what can we do to facilitate the integration of this compound in a more harmonious way in the West?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, as you say, I s- 2.5 years ago, I set up a little non-profit called the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences Project, because I was concerned about that there wasn't much research and there wasn't much conversation, public conversation about the possibility of harms from psychedelics.
Correct.
So we've produced several papers. We being me, with various psychologists like David Luke and Rosalind McAlpine and others. And we produced a paper, for example, on extended difficulties after psychedelics. What are the most common? And we've also produced papers on what helps people recover. So I think that's the first thing I would say is that we need a recognition that not everyone feels better after psychedelics. um, in one paper, not by us, but by researchers in Sweden, 9% of people who take psychedelics in naturalistic settings have some functional difficulties afterwards.
Which percentage? Sorry,
Nine.
9%.
That could be minor or major. In our survey, we 608 people replied to our survey reporting difficulties after psychedelics. For a third of those people, their difficulties lasted longer than a year. For a fifth, it was longer than 3 years. The most common difficulties were like things like anxiety, sleep disturbances, existential confusion, visual distortions, and derealization. So these would, but there were lots of different types, from like increased fear of death. Oh, there's a whole. You're familiar with them, Giancarlo. There's somatic problems and so on. So there's a whole variety of things that sometimes happen. Um, so people come to my NGO and get in contact, and they say, I couldn't find any information on post psychedelic difficulties. All I saw were these positive stories in CNN or New York Times, people who go to a veterans retreat or they take part in a clinical trial and their life is radically better. Those stories are true, but they're not always the story.
It's not the
And
whole
for that,
story.
and for that, so let's say maybe 5% of people who have real problems afterwards, they need good information and support. So that's what we're trying to do, is create a safety net so that they have access to good information both before the experience, so that they know, look, there is a chance that this could happen. Maybe it's a 5% chance, just so you know. Um, and then if they do get into, also that we know, how do we minimize this, how do we create a good retreat, how do we create a good clinic, how do we create a good underground guided experience, what are the red flags and the green flags when you're trying to select a retreat or a guide or a clinic. And then afterwards, if you're unlucky and you roll the dice and you have difficulties afterwards, can you have access to good information and specialist support? The problem is sometimes, well, people don't know where to go and they don't know what's going on with them. They're like me when I was 19. What is happening to me? And maybe they're part of psychedelic culture and they go to a kind of psychedelic coach or a therapist, and the coach or the therapist says, well, you need to listen to the medicine. You're not heeding the lesson of the mushroom, or what is mama ayahuasca trying to teach you. And this person may be dealing with severe insomnia or derealization or re-traumatization or HPPD, which is like hallucination persistent perception disorder, and they're already feeling a lot of self blame, and then they feel like blamed by the psychedelic community. Oh, you did it wrong, and now just shut up about it because you're going to give our favorite drugs a bad name.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, just
That's
good.
amazing job that you guys doing.
I think it's very niche, Giancarlo. I mean, I love, it's incredibly niche. It's like you know what I mean? It's like 1%. Let's 3% of the American population take psychedelics, and
how,
of
how
that
many? How
3%,
many? How many? 3%?
3 to 6%, and of that 3 to 6%,
But that's 20 million people.
that's a lot of people, yeah. But of
Yeah.
that, maybe 5% have severe difficulties afterwards. So, we're
But you do,
incredibly niche.
you're doing that again. It's incredible. Like, you don't understand, but the reputation you have out there. Like, my wife was like, "You still haven't had Jules Evans on your podcast. He's the best authority. He mix psychedelic and philosophy, and your reputation is incredible out there.
Oh,
But then you can't accept it. You say it's niche, but it's not."
Giancarlo, we are so niche. We're in this tiny little subculture called psychedelics.
But we are it's growing as mad, and then you said it, 6%. It's only in America.
Yeah,
It's 18 million people. But
yeah,
then what about in the world? What is
yeah,
6% of 9 billion?
yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
now that sounds a little bit pretentious, and people will make fun of me for saying that. But the psychonauts, it's a good crowd to have and interact with, because they are the most open-minded, they are the most paradigm challengers, and a lot of good things are coming from the psychonaut. So I just wanted to, like, boost your ego a little bit, because your work is super important. And yeah, I'm curious to see the answer to all the questions you
Yeah.
raise
Well,
on the end.
I agree. I agree that this is important. And what I'm very happy about is it's not just my team working on it. There's now, particularly in the last year or so, in the wake of Lycos getting rejected by the FDA and various other kinds of setbacks. Now there's a lot of people in the field going, oh, we've got to take safety seriously, more seriously. Next month, I'm going to California. There's a psychedelic safety summit, and they're gathering like 100 people from the field
Amazing.
for 3 days. The month after, there's a psychedelic safety researchers gathering. So, um, but there's a lot that needs to be done. There's so
Yeah.
many topics where there's not a single academic paper. For
Yeah.
example, reactivation, or for example,
Re-traumatization.
well that either. There's not a paper on that, or but
Yeah.
just like people waking up and they're tripping again, that kind of
Yeah.
flashback kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or someone contacted me yesterday. So they're having terrible nightmares for like over a year
Yeah.
after an ayahuasca experience. Have you
Yeah.
ever heard about that kind of thing?
The most side effect I hear is from 5-MeO DMT
Uh huh.
for flashbacks, and for physical danger, ibogaine.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
That's
Yeah.
the that's the thing
Yeah.
that's the
So,
two things I hear the most.
yeah. So people contact me and say things like, someone contacted me yesterday, said they've had severe insomnia after microdosing, and they're not sure, was it the microdosing or was it something else?
Yeah.
And so we try to connect them sometimes to people who've had similar problems and have come through them.
Yeah.
And we also try to produce papers. But what I wanted to say, Giancarlo, was just that there's now quite a few researchers working on this,
Yeah.
and there's also new organizations. But there's a lot to figure out for the whole field. For example, a topic I know we're both interested in is like this topic of um, misconduct, or poor conduct in the underground.
Yeah.
What does the field do about that? Like, could there be um, restorative justice processes? Could there be like an ombudsman or some kind of complaints procedure where you bring the facilitator and the client together, or the retreat owner and the client, and you have a conversation, or maybe multiple conversations, to the point where they feel, okay, I feel like you've heard me, and I feel like, maybe you're going to change your retreat to some extent, or your practice. I mean, uh, they've tried to develop this kind of thing in the world of breath work, like mediation processes, also clearer ethics guide codes. I've got a meeting later today, of various researchers, and we're looking at retreat centers, and we've looked at, I can't remember, maybe like 200 retreat centers. And do you know how many have uh, any mention of ethics on their website?
5%.
No, five.
Out
uh,
of how many?
Out of about 200.
Yeah. So
So whatever,
2.5%.
2.5%, yeah. Um, so thinking about those kinds of things, but and it's interesting because, as you know, the underground's been around for decades, but
Yeah.
it hasn't managed. And we're not the first people to talk about these kinds of topics, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, what about ethics? What about what happens when something goes wrong? And I'm very, you know this field better than me. Um, it hasn't developed these mechanisms, or has it? I mean,
Yes.
have you
I
had these
think
conversations before?
yes, yes. Geronimo and Ben, they devote a large part of their time in selecting safety and selection protocol.
Mm,
Like, how do participants select facilitator and vice versa. I know Geronimo recorded an online course to
yeah,
help people to select the right facilitator, and now there's much more talk of ethics, and like now with the internet, like I remember I started doing psychedelic at the beginning of the 2000, and there was not all this. There was, you really didn't know you went to the Amazon and you heard maybe a friend, but now people post and text, and a shaman with doesn't behave properly is immediately exposed.
Oh, well, I don't know if that's. I mean, I agree with you that places like Reddit and Facebook have a really important function. But first of all, not everyone knows about the kind of psychonaut page on Reddit or the ayahuasca page on Facebook.
But if
Uh,
someone goes on Google and says, "How can I choose my ayahuasca retreat?" You don't think there is already some sort of organization that helps selecting them? I hear through the grapevines, like retreat where after the third ceremony they take participant to look at land to buy under
yeah,
the.
and you are very well connected, Giancarlo. You are a veteran. But what's happened in the last few years is the number of people taking psychedelics has doubled from 3% to 6%. And so you get a lot of new arrivals come and they don't have your connections. They don't know the word on the street. But even if you do, stuff still happens. Anyway, I agree with you. There are places there the social media.
So I just Google how can I choose the right ayahuasca retreat,
Hmm.
and the first is Reddit discussion and forums.
Uh-huh.
So you have, how to find a reputable shaman, Quora. I mean, it's pretty out there. And I'm not saying that the problem is solved, because, we need more. Okay, so what is the problem is that this compound is illegal, right? Because in psychology, in law, in any other form of professionals, you have an association, like an architect, association of architects, and if you behave unethically, they report you and you lose your license and you lose your job. So
Yeah.
that doesn't happen. We don't have that.
Hmm.
But I feel that as these compounds will slowly get legalized, and they will. I mean, Lycos was a setback,
Hmm.
but then again, someone told me, listen, look at the Lycos debacle not so much as a setback, but as an encouraging episode. Because if you think about it, the FDA reason in terms of product
Hmm.
licensing, right? So the MDMA the MDMA, sorry, the MAPS wanted to be fair, so he wanted to apply for legalization and of not just a compound, but a compound and a therapy. So that's where I think the FDA get confused and then opened the door for these irregularities, and then this other organization was trying to jeopardize the process. But the fact that maps, the fact that there was this slowdown was because because the FDA was not able to completely evaluate the role of therapy because they can't measure it,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But this is good news. We are getting closer. We're getting
I
closer
agree.
to the. So
I mean,
I
I think
feel,
that's good news, but I agree that it's gonna. I think it's gonna happen. Yeah, I think
yeah.
psychedelic medicines will be legalized.
And once that happen, then psychedelic practitioners will be legalized and will be certified.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
So we
Yeah.
have to be patient, and people like you are making it faster and better.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. This is. I mean, there's various unpredictable things that will happen. I mean, I agree that psychedelic medicines will probably be approved in some forms in various countries in the next few years. That process will continue.
Exactly.
But they will be very tightly controlled and they'll be expensive and maybe they'll only be facilitatable by psychiatrists, and there will still be an underground.
But
And
in Oregon, for example, there is the weekend clinic, because there is the two track is the, like, insurable 5,000, 10,000, the super expensive through the insurance, that one model. But
yeah.
then there is also psychedelic not for a disease, but psychedelic for healthy people,
Uh-huh.
which is for people
Yeah,
that
and
maybe are lacking.
there's a ton of psychedelic churches,
Yeah.
some of which have got approval from the DEA. A lot of them have applied for it. So I agree. I mean,
So it doesn't have to be expensive and elitistic. It can be like a
I
little
agree.
clinic in the
Yeah,
in the countryside.
I
And
agree. Yeah,
I don't know if I'm wrong, but in Oregon there is already some licensing, not for through the medical system, but more through the wellness system.
yeah,
I
that's right. Yeah, yeah. It's not a medical program.
Yeah.
It's a recreational for
Yeah,
everyone.
which is recreation, such a bad word, but I would say more like,
Spiritual or whatever. In fact,
spiritual,
people go there
like,
for medical reasons. But
yeah,
so yeah, I agree with you. That makes sense to me. That the field is going to become more familiar because at the moment everyone's like, "Wow, this exciting new thing," and so there's a lot of new entrants
yeah,
who don't know what we know, which is
yeah,
like not everyone's a good person in this space, or just that
yeah.
it's a little wild.
Yeah, but just to reassure you a little bit more, we are building this long-term retreat in the old town of Ibiza
Ah,
called Diffuso, and we don't do psychedelic because that's illegal in Spain. We are monitoring very closely what can we do and when, but we use expanded state. Our model for regeneration and transformation and growth is three pillars: is the therapy, the community, and the expanded states, right? So with expanded states we do mostly allotropic breath work and some eros, and but let's pick up breath work, for example. So we had this client. Now she's with us for a month, and she started with the somatic therapy, and the therapist. So she has three therapies: one for the expanded states, one for the somatic therapy, and one for the compassion inquiry. And the therapists work together and they can communicate. The client has waived the confidentiality towards vis-a-vis the group of therapists, like in a rehab, if you want. And so this lady, from the first session with the somatic practitioner, it was clear that her nervous system was really stressed. And so she had on the program an holotropic breathwork session, and the therapist that communicated said, listen, she's not ready for a cathartic experience. Her nervous system is too agitated now. So we should push that 3 weeks down the road. So there are these discussion. I know we are in Ibiza, we are in the capital of expanded state, but but it's happening, and this lady is writing about it and is blogging. So I'm
I
I'm I'm
agree.
I'm I'm encouraging you to see the glass half full,
Yeah,
and I'm encouraging you to see yourself as a very important element of this movement of conscious psychedelic, if you want, or
yeah,
more awareness. You're doing
yeah,
such a great work.
yeah. Well, thank you, thank you. I'm also pretty much positive and optimistic. Like I can see the direction of evolution for the field. Um, so it's part of a kind of reawakening to ecstatic experiences, which in general for our society, which is incredibly turbulent, and it goes along with other stuff like the breaking down of old structures, the rise of cults and prophets and false prophets. So we're in a bit like the Reformation. We're in this wild stage,
Yeah,
and it's really interesting. And
yeah,
psychedelics is just one part of that.
yeah,
But
exactly, exactly.
you're right. But there's just
But
there's
yeah,
a lot to be done, and we're in this funny stage where it's like building processes and to some and it's this um, it's like for example, here's an example. Retreat centers, or there's the whole retreat ecosystem. Like, can we encourage them to have ethics codes to make them more kind of clear to their facilitators and to their clients? What about tracking outcomes? Occasionally, there are accidents that happen at retreat centers.
yeah,
Uh,
suggestibility.
Suggestibility, but also accidents like um, you know there's been a couple of drownings recently. Someone goes to the river in Costa Rica near the retreat center, and for some reason they drown. Or
Wow.
someone is at a retreat center in Jamaica, and maybe they're still too high and they get in trouble and they drown. Or someone has a heart attack. These are all things that have happened in the last few months. Or just people go into a manic state. So we don't know about these kinds of outcomes. So we can't learn from them. And if you can't learn from them, nothing changes. So I would love there to be some kind of voluntary network of retreat centers. And probably ICEERS is the organization that could develop this because they have the trust and they have the connections.
Yeah,
Where retreat centers, who on the whole, 90% of them want to do a good job,
yeah,
and they can say this happened,
Yeah.
and we think it might have been because of this, this, and this, so that the field can learn from it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like a booking.com for retreat.
Well, yeah, but also like an outcomes report
Yeah.
place, and it
Yeah.
can be anonymous. It could be like, okay, look, this client, a case study. This
Yeah.
client went into a manic state afterwards. Here's how we tried to deal with it.
Yeah.
So that the field can learn from each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah. Yeah. But you know that, I don't know if you have time but I'm sure that a good business plan around this kind of like a non-profit that would aggregate all this knowledge and what I'm trying to say is that maybe there can be some funding available from all these high net worth psychedelic people.
Yeah, well, I remember pitching to the Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative when I was just starting this NGO 2 years ago, and they were like, and actually, it was a gathering of people. There was people from Fireside, people from Cheetah House,
Yeah.
uh, me, and others, and the high net worth people were like, well, I remember one of them saying, aren't you being a bit negative? Like, why are you focusing on the negative?
Yeah.
And
How
yeah,
long ago was that?
2.5 years.
But you see, now already there are some news.
Yeah, we've had funding, a little bit of funding from some of them, and they've
Yeah.
also, like, the Cohen Foundation is funding this new psychedelic safety institute.
Yeah.
So there's been a big shift.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
uh, yeah, so and what the hope as well is that there's going to be more federal funding. That was the hope, but now, of course, we're in an Elon Musk Doge,
Yeah.
federal funding freeze.
Yeah. But
But
also into a Maha Kennedy
well, that's
psychedelic
true too.
friendly.
Yeah, so um, but that's the big funding is like NIH funding, ARPA,
I see.
um, and they're beginning to get more interested in psychedelics, and they want to do it right, and they want to do it safe. So I have colleagues that I work with, researchers, academic researchers. They're now pitching for like big grants, like
Yeah.
multi-million dollar grants on psychedelic safety. Um, and that's good. We're not talking like 100,000, but they're
Yeah. Yeah.
pitching for like 1 million, 5 million. These big
Yeah.
big federal grants. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. But so just to wrap it up, I saw you start writing a little bit about politics. Where do you see your writing? What's your project for the future? Where do you want to see yourself in 5, 10 years?
I probably will work on the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences project probably for another 2 years
Uh huh.
or 3 years, and then I would like to put it into a position where it can carry on doing some kind of essential work. But it's really a catalyst. So already some of its work is being kind of done by big academic centers. They can do it better. So it's a catalyst to try and help the field develop. Um, so after that, I always become interested in something else. So I've worked on Stoic philosophy. I've worked on ecstatic experiences.
So what's the next thing you're gonna be interested in? You don't know. It
Well,
hasn't come yet.
I wrote a book about uh, spiritual eugenics, which is the overlap between eugenics and New Age spirituality, and why were so many figures in New Age culture interested in eugenics in some form or other.
So eugenics is like population limitation. What's eugenics again?
Eugenics, it's basically the idea um, that we can steer evolution towards better outcomes, just as we can breed dogs or horses or different types of fruit. We can breed better types of human.
I see.
And uh, a lot of figures in New Age culture were into evolutionary spirituality. They think of evolution as like God. And they believe people like Aldous Huxley, people like Julian Huxley, people like um, theosophists and so on, people like all the way to like Abraham Maslow or Osho, Timothy Leary, Aleister Crowley, all these figures thought that we could steer evolution towards higher goals. We could make humans into superhumans. This, by the way, you can even see a bit of this in like Stanislav Grof, like evolutionary spirituality. And so I wrote a book talking about this and tracing the history of it and seeing how it could sometimes end up in some dark places like um, authoritarian.
Singularity.
Well, yeah, like that. But I mean, obviously, it can lead to like nasty eugenicist politics. So there is now this new kind of liberal eugenics, like with genetic modification. So, for example, someone like Christian Angermeyer, he is the biggest investor in psychedelics, and he's not a eugenicist, but he's a big believer in genetic modification. He thinks that humans will split into those who reject genetic modification and those who embrace it, and those who embrace it will become immortal cosmic beings, which is
Wow.
pretty much what Timothy Leary thought, by the way.
with
So
with 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 cryonics.
with cryonics, but actually we'll edit our genes so we won't die. So there are, the new deputy secretary uh, of the Health and Human Services, Jim O'Neill.
In America, in the
Yeah,
States.
he's called Jim O'Neill. He used to work with Peter Thiel. I was at Burning Man with him in 2018, before he was, deputy secretary of HHS, and he thinks he's a transhumanist. So he thinks he will never die, and like Peter Thiel thinks he will never die, and they think that they will discover, science will advance so much that we'll become these immortal kind of super beings. And then there's a whole interesting politics around that, like, what will everyone or just the elite? So I am interested in that. I want to interview your friend Daniel about that, because I think he's seen some of this kind of transhumanism with in Silicon Valley and in the US. Anyway, but who knows? I'm not sure what I'll be working on in 5 years. Um, I, I love staying curious, and I love learning. I love, you know, just learning about something new. So I've been writing about all the weird bits of the MAGA movement, like the transhumanist libertarians and the ecstatic Christians and the conspiracy theorists. Um, and I'm curious about what will happen on the left, what kind of new political movements will arise on the left, what new forms of religion might emerge, what will happen with psychedelic churches. So, what it's very unusual for me to stay on one topic as long as I have. But at the moment, because I feel we're at a critical point with psychedelic culture, I'm really just staying focused on psychedelic safety, because I feel like these next few years are critical.
But don't you think that that rupture between the, I don't want to say fake identity, but like a perceived identity, like in your case, you said, you had that rupture between, the gregarious extrovert joke tellers, and then after a few difficult psychedelic experience, you had the sense, you start having the doubt: who's the real me? Maybe I'm not that good at being that. The social anxiety. So how do you think we can minimize the risk of this rupture? What we call a psychotic experience, I think it's just like a brutal widening of, like it's like an identity split, right? That's
Yeah,
what it's like. I don't know who I am. And but so what can, personally, I'm interested from a psychotherapeutical point of view to prepare the psychedelic participant in being open, maybe, that this is one part of you, to minimize the shock.
yeah,
Because
I get it.
so
I
so
get
that's how we can maybe minimize the risk of the psychotic experience. Also ontologically, like Ben and Geronimo, they explain it so well. They say, listen, in the indigenous people, when they say that the river is your brother and the mountain is the sister and the moon is the sister, they don't mean it metaphorically, they mean it literally. They feel that we are molecularly, subatomic molecularly connected with the water and the river, and we are part, like in the animist religion, right?
Uh-huh.
So even if in school we can at least not preach it, but just teach this animist religion, or then we can, then maybe that rapture, like, because what people call integration, I think, is misleading, because in the psychedelic world, we by integration, what we mean is one or two Zoom call checking in how you're doing. But then, the psychedelic experience can be ontological, so violent that is like, you take the Flintstone from the caveman, you put them in Manhattan for one day, and then you say, okay, let's integrate that with a couple of Zoom call. I mean, it takes time to
Yeah,
explain what happened in a million of years, right?
I
So
agree.
I feel that in order to minimize this psychotic risk, we need to start informing people that there is the other paradigm, which is
I agree.
the consciousness, not an epiphenomenon of the brain, but consciousness as primordial. And this compound can connect you with this primordial consciousness. And so all your story disappears, but then you don't feel like who you are, I'm dying. You feel I'm immortal.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
preparation.
I mean, yeah, it's it's very interesting, and I think the big the big question, one of the big questions I grapple with is how to improve ecstatic literacy. Our culture's familiarity and discrimination and maturity when it comes to ecstatic experiences. And I watched Geronimo's course on this really, and it talks about, like, just because ayahuasca tells you something doesn't mean it's necessarily true, or just because you got a message, I am a shaman, or I should leave my wife, well, you shouldn't necessarily act on it immediately. So all this kind of basic stuff about discrimination, um, we are having to learn as a culture as these kinds of experiences become more common, and that's hard. Um, and I think one of the key questions, Giancarlo, is how do we do that in a way that is compatible with liberalism and with democracy? Because what sometimes happens with ecstatic revelations is people say, "I know what this means for everyone." And here's my vision for society. So everyone should learn about the Bible, and it's, we got to return to becoming a Christian society, or everyone's got to learn about cosmic consciousness. And wouldn't it be amazing if everyone learnt the holy teachings of Stanislav Grof, in society or something like that? So pluralism. How can we be open to the ecstatic without saying, but I definitely know, you know, what's good for you, and if you disagree with me, you are not just wrong. Maybe you're demonic.
Yeah, but that's not, I don't want to say correct or incorrect, but I think like an ecstatic state's outcome that leads to the fundamentalism, or it's a little bit of a consequence. It's almost a pathology. It's almost like an underlying feeling of narcissism that then get expanded by the ecstatic states, right?
Yeah.
But so, okay, so that's why I think it's critical that the psychedelic experience should be accompanied by therapy.
Uh-huh.
Like in the term psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, everybody gets very excited about the word psychedelic, but
Hmm.
it's a misunderstanding. The important part of the sentence is psychotherapy.
Hmm.
The psychedelic is only a tool from the psychotherapist to have a better access to the subconscious material.
Hmm.
It's like this new generation of psychotherapists, thanks to expanded state or the ecstatic states, they have a better map. We are mapping the subconscious every day, every year. We have a better sense of the map of the subconscious. So, like my friend says, don't give the holotropic breath work to this lady who has too much of a deteriorated nervous system, because that would pathologizing it. Like if she had done it, a holotropic breath work or a mushroom session or a psychedelic session in that state of vulnerability, maybe she would have been suicidal. Maybe she would have like drowned in the river. So
Yeah.
that's I feel that the psychedelic is it's a tool for psychotherapists to help the transformation and the growth. It's not something people can do alone. It's like a bisturi.
Could be. I mean, I also, I've done reporting on, the world of underground psychedelic therapy, and that's a pretty messy world sometimes. And yeah, so I think it's true. I think it's possible, but that's also like that's not really scalable. You know,
What do you
I
mean? That knowledge?
Well, that knowledge is not scalable, and also just going to a psychedelic therapist is expensive. You know, that's not going to be affordable for most people. But I don't know. I mean, I think that's a kind of we touched on a much bigger question, which is just ecstasy and revelation and prophecy and all this kinds of non-rational stuff, and how you fit it into a kind of rational, secular, liberal society.
But you don't.
You don't, yeah.
You
Well,
don't.
then you have, then you have the
Rational and
problem.
mystical. Rational and mystical. It's not. You can't reconcile rational and mystical,
Right,
right?
they did it in ancient Greece, because the alternative is you have a spiritual commune, which is like a kind of like an ashram or a neo monastery. And I mean, I remember like I'm my wife and I are moving to an eco community in Costa Rica, and I remember we're trying to work out governance for this eco.
In Pachamama.
No, Eco Villa it's called.
Hmm.
Like where Charles Eisenstein's going to live, and we were trying to work out a governance structure.
Hmm.
And there was a small group meeting to discuss it, and I said, look, we need to be transparent and we need to give everyone a vote. Like it should be democratic. And one of the kind of new age people said, well, democracy, that's what's got us in this mess, you know. So they were anti-liberal. um, Instead, that we would feel the vibes and feel the natural, what emerges. So I all I'm saying is I think these are very interesting questions,
Yeah,
combining
very
mystical
interesting.
and the ecstatic and the secular, liberal democratic.
Yeah, but for example, you heard about Damanhur, right?
Uh-huh.
So because I'm interested, like like I try to develop a TV show in my movie production days called post-capitalistic societies, right? So the idea was like we had the speaker, and every episode would be Tamera, Damanhur, Oroville, Finghorn, Pachamama, the different communes. So I went to visit some of them, and
Oh
I've
yeah.
been in, and for example, one of the ambassador of Damanhur, Esperide, she was here in Ibiza. I had her on the podcast, and they're doing a great job in merging the metaphysical and liberalism, because they're now from it's based in Turin, and there is their set of belief of of communion with plants and spirit, and they believe that they build this incredible temple. You're familiar with the temple of
Uh-huh.
Damanhur.
Uh-huh.
They think that it was a message from a different civilization, because they didn't have the engineering drawing. I mean, people say, how did you do that without the engineering drawing, like digging hundreds of meters? But then also they're now open to capitalism and to Turin and to whoever wants to come and build gym or nightclubs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they are open.
Oh,
So
that's
so so that's super interesting, right? And
yeah.
and 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 for example, Auroville, they have they have their own currency, and they don't believe in they I don't know how to I don't want to make a mistake, but I don't know about the position on competition. But what I remember is that they were, they believe in creativity and production and invention, and they developed this solar panel that then they sold to the Indian government, and they were paid in local money, but they was transferred in their own money. And
Uh-huh.
so I feel that there is a way of ecstatic states, but also creativity and creation, and yes, commerce. Commerce is not a bad world,
No, no,
right?
I agree. And look at the Rajneesh community. It was very entrepreneurial and
Osho,
very innovative. Yeah, the Osho
yeah.
community. Yeah, I agree.
But then what went wrong there? That
All
it was
kinds of things.
all kind of, but it was a cult of personality.
Yeah.
There was, I feel that the community, the future of the third millennium will get the best of the liberalism that we created, integrated with ecstatic states. And I feel ultimately, and I might be just a naive romantic, but if we learn that gap, right, between the our identity, perceived identity or mask, and our true self, if we manage to navigate that transition without shock, that ultimately will bring peace in this planet, right?
I, I mean, I don't think that peace in our planet will happen in our lifetime.
Oh, I agree. I
But
agree.
it's an aspiration. It's the right one.
Yeah, it can take 1,000 years.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I guess I should think it's possible. I should not be a cynic and think
But
it's
are you still a
yeah. I'm
cynic?
definitely a cynic, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
but but I do think, yeah, I think it must be possible. Some kind of ecstatic liberalism, and there's
totally.
been like people like the Quakers. I'm from a
Yeah,
Quaker family, and they're kind of ecstatic,
yeah.
but
Like
liberal.
Eisenstein that you mentioned says that our heart know a better world is possible.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But so
Uh,
I wonder if cynicism one day will be considered a pathology.
I'll be sent to the funny farm.
Come to Ibiza. Let me host you for a few months and we'll do some therapy.
I'm fascinated by Ibiza. We haven't talked about it at all, but you know, I have never been to Ibiza, and I love. I'm fascinated by the subculture of the new age, and then you get subcultures. So you get Ibiza, and you get Austin, and you get the Amazon, and Costa Rica, where I
Yeah,
live.
yeah.
So
And
uh,
then and technology and Burning Man and
yeah,
crypto and AI. It's a great intersection of people.
is it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would love to go to Ibiza.
Come,
Um,
come, come.
yeah.
I'll keep a little apartment for you.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds very interesting. You're at the retreat center you're setting up, and yeah. Well, let's keep talking about these kinds of topics. They're going to be
Yeah,
critical in the next kind of 2 to 3 years, and it's going to be
yeah,
a very interesting time. And you know, places like ISIS have a critical role to play,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and lots and others as well. And maybe we can help. Think about some of these. Networks of retreats and stuff, and
Yeah,
how
yeah,
to
yeah. When you're here, you'll meet Geronimo, and then Ben comes and goes from Barcelona,
Mhm.
and I can facilitate a meeting with you, ICers, maybe some funders.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
In exchange, don't look too much at politics and look more at psychotherapy. Have a look at this new theory of the autonomic nervous system. It's fascinating. This idea that trauma is in your body and you build an armor. Remember Michael Pollan
Mhm,
called the default mode network? Are you
mhm,
familiar with the DMS, the default mode network?
mhm,
Michael Pollan called it the egoic armor.
mm.
He says that this network between the prefrontal cortex, the medium, and the thalamus that the neuropsychopharmacologist proved with the fMRI that with psychedelic, with all the tryptamines,
Mhm,
magic mushroom, LSD, MDMA, peyote, DMT, mescaline, it reduced this circuit. It's like you'll see on the fMRI from red, orange, it becomes green, and so it's like the egoic armor gets dissolved, and
mm,
now the brain is, all the different part of the brain is finally happy to
mm.
express themselves without this lock of what who do I think I am.
Mhm, mhm.
And this is fascinating, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a good part, and people. come to my NGO, a lot of them say that learning about nervous system dysregulation and how to re-regulate is really helpful to them in their recovery.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
there's all kinds of different levels, and you know, Aldous Huxley said the great original sin is oversimplification, wanting to just interpret from one level, like just the genetic, or
Hmm.
just the spiritual, or just the cognitive, or whatever. And so these you different people find different levels helpful at particular times, but you can also kind of you can help them talk to each other. These different modalities.
Exactly. Jules, thank you so much for your time. You give me more time than anticipated. I'm very grateful.
Sure, I enjoyed it. It's nice to talk to you, Giancarlo.
Yes, yes. Looking forward to have you in Ibiza. Do you if people wants to read you
Yeah,
or donate on your NGO, give us some links. Mhm.
yeah, sure. My Substack every week is called ecstaticintegration.org. If you would want to find out more about post psychedelic difficulties, go to challengingpsychedelicexperiences.com. That's the little NGO that I help to run.
Fantastico. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Speak soon.
bye. Take care.
Take care. Thank you, Jules. Take care.
Koka sunarai sunarayanti. 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 Koka sunarai sunarayanti.